Okay, next, let's go over to the coverage because I think this is really important for us. We want to make sure that it's going to cover us. This insurance is going to cover us in the exact same way that the security deposits do. That's why I spent a couple minutes at the beginning reminding us, okay, this is what security deposits do, because we don't want to make it easy and affordable for tenants, and then we're going to get screwed. We're not going to have the same amount of coverage. So let me just spend a couple minutes talking about how the security deposit and rent insurance companies do cover landlords. Okay, I already mentioned this a little bit, but what happens at the renewal? It can be renewed at the lease renewal. It continues, but it differs a little bit between the two types. For the security deposit, we already talked about this. You don't need to renew it. If you sign an initial lease of 1 year and the tenant renews your lease, you don't need to contact them. You don't need the guarantors. You don't need to pay again. It covers the entire tenancy, no matter how long the tenants stay. And again, just to reiterate, like Kimberly was saying, did I hear this right? Yes, the tenants only pay once. And I even asked the agent, I said, look, what happens if the tenant stays for 10 years? She goes, we cover them. She said, it works the same. Think about it. That's how security deposits work. We don't ask the tenants to continually pay security deposits over and over again. So the security deposit insurance works the same way. Doesn't work that way for the rent coverage, though. The rent coverage insurance, the tenants do have to pay again at the renewal. And that sort of makes sense because you bought that insurance for that specific year. The tenants didn't use it. They paid all their rent on time. They weren't missing any rent. So now you got to pay, or the tenant has to pay for that next term that's coming up. So keep that in mind. If you're going to make that a requirement, it could get really expensive for the tenants. And I don't think we probably should make that, mandatory, because I don't think that would be fair to keep asking the tenants to pay over and over and over again every single time. What happens if during holdovers or evictions, you are covered? Depending again. So if you have a holdover, remember everybody what a holdover is. The lease has ended, but the tenants, for whatever reason, just don't leave. Maybe they're buying a house and they need another month to close, or maybe they just absolutely refuse to leave for whatever reason. If you do have these holdover tenants, the rent coverage is not going to continue. It ends whenever the lease ends. But that's not the case with evictions. If you have an active eviction going on, the rent coverage will continue until you get your property back. So that's awesome. You don't get that, any type of coverage whatsoever if you don't have the rent coverage with the companies. And then if you do have holdovers or eviction and you have the security deposit insurance, it absolutely continues throughout this whole period. It doesn't matter if you want to extend the lease for another 2 months while they buy the house. It doesn't matter if you're going through an eviction. It absolutely will continue to cover it. And then somebody already asked this question, but this is where I wanted to reiterate. Tenants cannot cancel the contract. So if a tenant calls and says, hey, I don't want it anymore, cancel it. Nope, the guarantors absolutely will not cancel it behind your back. And not only that, they can't then, the whole policy that the guarantors has is they cannot cancel it after they move in. This, I guess, could be a little bit of a downside for the tenants, is that they will not get any refunds, even if they terminate the lease early. Even if the landlord, gives them the okay, they can move out early. The tenants, if they moved in, that's it. They're not going to get the premium back. Okay, Body's saying, does the owner still have to get the bank account for the security deposit? No, Body, you do not. And that's one of the great things about the security deposit coverage, is it completely eliminates all those very tedious security deposit requirements, including specifying, what bank it is, what amount, all of that good stuff. Okay, so Jeffrey, I guess you're a little bit unclear. It says about treating the applicants equally. How can you advertise zero security deposit? So that's what I do when I advertise my properties. I say security deposit, either, I forgot what I'm making it up, 2,000 or security deposit insurance. The reason that's legal is that you're offering it to everybody. You're not mandating it. You're offering a choice. If somebody wants to pay the cash security deposit, they pay the cash security deposit. If somebody wants to use the insurance, they're opting to use that insurance. You're not discriminating against anybody in any way. You're just offering it as one of the options there. Okay, Kimberly's saying, okay, wait, they will pay for rent during the months it takes to get an eviction. Yes, So Kimberly, that is one of the awesome things again about this rent coverage. Let's say for whatever reason, the tenants stop paying the rent, you file for an eviction, and it takes you 2 months to get for that eviction. If you elected enough coverage, the guarantors will pay those 2 months it takes you to evict those tenants. How awesome is that? This is why I didn't do it for these tenants, but I'm going to add that, I think, to some of my policies. The guarantors rent coverage will pay for the months it takes you to go through the eviction process, and you're not getting your rent. Awesome. Now let's take a look at how much does this actually cost the tenants, and is it really going to save them money, less money than the security deposit. What the guarantor says is they give you a guideline that it's going to cost somewhere between 24% and 130% of 1 month's rent. What this cost is going to be based on is two things. And by far, when I talked to the agent, they said by far the biggest factor is going to be the tenant's credit, their profile, their credit history. They're going to remember they do a soft pull on their credit. So they're going to know what their credit score is, and they're going to take a look at the debt to income ratio. Do these tenants have enough money to pay for the rent? Same exact thing that we landlords do when we screen our tenants. We don't only look at this, but it is a really big determining factor. This is, like I said, the agent from the guarantor said this is the biggest factor that they look at when they're trying to decide whether they're going to approve them and how much they're going to charge the tenant. The other factor that goes into determining the cost for the policies is the coverages that we select. So for the rent example is how many months rent coverage do we want? Do we want rent coverage for 2 months, or do we want rent coverage for 12 months the entire year? Of course, the more months that we select, the more it's going to cost the tenant. So this is where I'm saying kind of be careful. And in the security deposit, I think that's sort of obvious too, is the cost is going to be based on the amount of coverage. If we ask for 5 times the rent, 5 times a month of security deposit, of course, that's going to cost higher rather than if we just ask for 1.5 months of coverage. So keep that in mind when you're selecting your coverage. These are the two things that the cost is based on. So now let me show you samples of what it costs. Okay, so these are real world examples that I use for my rental properties. This is the first example, and just let me give you a little bit of background on the property and the tenant. So this is a really nice townhouse that I own here in Tinley Park. And like I said, this is almost $3,000. I decided to go a little bit lower. I actually had a discussion with Hadi about this when I listed it for rent like a couple of weeks ago. And I did, like you guys, I did my rent analysis and I took a look at what the rents were going for. I just couldn't believe how much the rents had gone up. Most of the rents for, 3-4 bedroom townhouses in Tinley Park were like 3,200, 3,500. I was just shocked. I decided to go just a little bit lower. I don't know. Everybody makes their own decision. I just wanted to get somebody in there. I didn't want to get shocked, so I went a little bit lower. That's my rationale. That's how much I asked for in rent, and this is how much the security deposit comes out to. That's 1.5 months rent. That's what I do. Okay, so that's my coverage, or my part of the coverage that is in the criteria that I selected. So this tenant who ended up renting my property, she was an amazing applicant. Her credit score was about 740. She made $10,000 a month. Yes, absolutely, that is true. I absolutely verified it 2 different ways. I just found this really cool website, and I'll talk to you guys about it in the future. Pulls from her bank accounts. It's not like they could submit fake documents or anything. Absolutely verified. She made $10,000 a month, and she pretty much had zero debt. I think she had 2 tiny little credit cards that amounted to $3,500. So I think all of us would agree this is an amazing applicant. This is an amazing tenant. She should have no problem qualifying. She didn't have no problem qualifying for my townhouse, but I did advertise it as, hey, I offer the security deposit insurance. She decided to do it. I was a little bit, surprised. She absolutely said, I can't afford to pay the security deposit, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to have $4,462 not at my disposal for years and years and years. Instead, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to buy myself a whole new house of furniture. Awesome. Remember, one of the reasons why the security deposit alternatives or insurance is really attractive. It's not just made for people who have trouble qualifying. It's also very attractive for people who just don't want to, they want to be able to use their money for other things. So when this person applied to my property, I was still using Rhino. Instantly, they applied and Rhino denied her. And both of us were absolutely shocked. How the heck can you deny somebody, like this? We tried contacting them, never could get a clear answer. Forget it. So this is where I did my research and I went through the guarantors. Boom. And she was instantly, covered within an hour, I mentioned. How much did it cost her? Is it really better for her to do this instead of a security deposit? So I just played around with it since it was my very first time. Just to play around with it, I elected 2 months of rent coverage. So it covered $5,950. And what it ended would end, and it, I'm sorry, and then the coverage that I elected was the security deposit, 1.5 month rent. So it covered her for $4,462. And here you can see it was going to cost her $2,031. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of money, but remember, she was going to have to pay $4,400 in security deposit anyway. With this, it was going to cut it in half. She was only going to have to pay, $2,000 ish. Okay. So then I said, okay, I don't think I really need rent coverage for her. She makes so much money, has no debt. I did my whole really thorough screening of her. I had a good feeling she was going to be an awesome tenant. I wasn't going to have any problems collecting the rent. So instead, I eliminated that rent coverage. So now I elected no rent month coverage, that same 1.5 months rent. Look at how much it brought it down to. Her premium ended up being $1,125. So that's what she ended up paying instead of the $4,400. And look at the difference. That's about $3,000 difference that she didn't have to come up with. And yet I got the exact same coverage as a security deposit. Let me tell you, she was thrilled. Again, she makes a lot of money. She had the money in the bank. I verified it, but she was super thrilled that she didn't have to, come up with that extra $3,000. Okay, so now let me show you another example. And this is basically the townhouse, I think, is a little bit of an unusual property because it's higher end, it's expensive. I think this example here probably fits more of us a little bit better because the rent is, at a lower price point. So this one is a single family home. I don't know why I ended up, most of my properties are in Midlothian, your average blue collar type of, neighborhood area. And the rent that I'm asking is $1,650. I am way below market value, but that's a whole nother topic. So the rent is at $1,650. 1.5 months rent ends up being $2,475 as a security deposit. So these tenants, their credit profile is awful. They've been my tenants for 4 years now. Their credit score are in the mid 500s. Their income is roughly about this. I'm not really sure what their debt is at now because they've been my tenants for quite a while. But when I checked it a couple of years ago, they really didn't have much debt. They're just young kids, their first house right after their first apartment. So they really didn't have a lot of debt. Now, you're looking at the saying, why the heck would you ever rent to these people? Normally, I probably would have declined them. They just really didn't qualify because of their low credit score. But I think hopefully a lot of us don't just look at their credit score. When I took a look at it, it really wasn't due to anything major. They were young kids, didn't have a lot of credit. They had one or two little minor things for like 100, $200, like medical debt and a cell phone or something that just absolutely dragged their score down. Everything else was okay. On top of that, I knew their parents. The female tenants, her parents rent for me. They're actually my tenants at another house, 5 houses away. They're awesome tenants. I knew them. I knew they were going to be great tenants, and I haven't had any problem with them over the years. So this is a good example where the security deposit insurance offers you the chance to give these tenants who otherwise wouldn't qualify, but they're going to be a good tenant. They wouldn't qualify, but by offering them the security deposit insurance, I was able to keep them as a tenant. Okay. Paul is saying, can the security deposit coverage be used to reimburse the landlord for unpaid rent? Yes. So the security deposit insurance covers everything that the normal security deposits does. Unpaid rent, damages, legal fees, what is it? Yeah, everything that the security deposit does, unless we're in Cook County. Okay. So let me show you how much, the security deposit coverage company costs these individuals. Remember, they have a horrible, credit profile. So again, I try to play around with having the rent coverage and the security deposit coverage. So just to play around, I put 12 months of rent coverage, $19,800, and the 1.5 month security deposit. It was way too expensive. I mean, it was going to cost the tenants, a little more than $4,000. So you can see here, this is what the premium was going to be. Well, their regular security deposit is $2,475. There's no way I'm going to make them pay, double that amount. So it's once you start adding a large amounts of rent, it just makes it really expensive. And I don't think it helps because these tenants have, basically the terrible credit scores. So then what I did was I eliminated the rent coverage. So if I have 0 months of rent coverage, but 1.5 months of rent, look at what it brought down the premium to. It only costs $1,616, much, much cheaper than the normal $2,475 security deposit. You can see here, the screen capture from the premium. They loved it. Again, they didn't, young kids, not a lot of disposable income, horrible credit. Instead of paying the $2,475, they just pay the $1,616 one-time fee. They're covered. They're good to go for the rest of for the rest of their tenancy there. Now the question, Jackie says they don't get the money back when they move out. No, that is the drawback. I can tell you guys, everybody who has had it, I've had a handful of tenants who have had it, they don't care. They're thinking, how much money do I have to pay now? Do I have to pay $2,475 or do I have to pay $1,616? Heck yeah, I'm gonna choose the $1,616. They don't think about having to, they're not going to get that money back later on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. It has not seemed to bother anybody. Everybody who I've offered it to, we've gone through the whole application process. I am very clear and specific, explaining to them, look, this is a premium. You're not going to get it back. Has never phased them. Nobody has ever said, nope, I don't like it. I'm not going to do it. Sandy is saying, so you're able to see how much it will cost them before they agree. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everybody can see exactly what it's going to cost them before you agree. That way, everybody goes into it knowing exactly what it's going to cost them. And let's say, these tenants do see the cost. Okay, I'm going to have to pay $1,616. It's non-refundable versus $2,475. It is refundable. There is no obligation for them to buy it. They can say, nope, I don't want it. Instead, I'm just going to pay the security deposit because I know the entire cost up front. Absolutely. There's no obligation for them to buy. Okay, so let me then show you one more example with this exact same house. So it's the exact same single family home in Midlothian. You remember, $1,650 a month, $2,475. This is where I pretended to be the applicant. So I used my credit score and my credit profile because I showed you where my tenants had just awful credit. I think that's very unusual. I wanted to more see sort of what the average applicant would have to pay for your average home, in the south suburbs there. So again, this is, I pretended to be the tenant. This is my credit score. It's gone down. I've had a lot of debt recently. Usually a little bit higher, but anyway, it's still pretty good. I pretended to have an income of $6,500 a month. Again, I'm just trying to, put in there your average amount that I think tenants make a month, just sort of guesstimating. So that's what I put in the application. I'm not quite sure how much my debt is every single month, only because I've got a bunch of rental properties on there. Your credit cards fluctuate. I kind of guesstimated I'm paying about $2,500, $3,000 a month. I've got a lot of debts right now because some stuff that happened with my rental properties. But again, I'm trying to put in sort of a worst case scenario because I'm trying to say, okay, I don't have a ton of income. And the debt is actually, you can see here, it's getting pretty close to 50%. That's not great, but let's see what happens here when I pretended to be a tenant and I applied for my own house. So this time I selected no months of rent coverage and the exact same $2,475. Jeffrey, this is where that $626 came in. This is what it came back for my premium that I would have to pay for my house. Here you can see my name. Look at the difference, what a difference it makes having a good credit score. Remember the premium that my tenants are paying with a horrible credit score, 1616. I would only end up having to pay $626. I would pay almost $1,900 less. This is where I mentioned the guarantors say your credit profile makes a really big difference. Of course, if I'm a tenant and I only have to pay $600 instead of the 2475, yeah, I would rather do that, even if it's non-refundable. It's just very, very attractive for everybody.